Welcome to Species at Risk, prepared for the Bruce County Museum and Cultural Center for Earth Day 2023 by the Bluewater Education Foundation and the Bluewater Outdoor Education Center. First, what is a species at risk? A species at risk is any naturally occurring type of plant or animal in danger of extinction or of disappearing from the province. Most of these types of animals and plants are facing problems caused by human activities. Species at risk are divided into different categories based on how much danger they are in. The lowest risk level is special concern. This means an animal or plant may become threatened or an endangered species because of a combination of biological characteristics and identified threats. When a species becomes threatened, that means they are likely to become an endangered species if nothing is done to reverse the factors leading to extirpation or extinction. Endangered means that the threat is imminent, that they will become extirpated or extinct. If efforts to save species fail, they may become extirpated or extinct. Extirpated means that an animal or plant no longer exists in the wild in Canada, but exists somewhere else in the world in the wild. And extinct, of course, means that an animal or plant no longer exists anywhere in the world. The first group of species at risk that we care deeply about here at the OEC are birds. Before we look at our bird species at risk here at the OEC, what is it that causes so many bird species to be in danger? Many birds become species at risk due to habitat loss. While some are able to adapt, chimney swifts used to nest in the hollow trunks of large dead trees and adjusted to use chimneys when those trees were cut and cities were built. Many cannot. This is why it's important to protect habitats that birds use. When we think of hunting and trapping, usually we think now of hunting for species that we then use for something, deer, ducks, and others for their meat, or to get rid of a species that is causing an issue like beavers or squirrels. However, some species in the past were hunted to the point of becoming a species at risk, or to extinction or extirpation, because they were thought of as a pest, even if they weren't, or as trophies. Pesticides also put birds at risk in a few different ways. They kill the insects that many birds depend on for food, but they also can build up in the food chain. A small insect develops resistance to a pesticide, then a larger insect eats 10 of those smaller insects, then a frog eats 10 of those insects, then a fish eats 10 of those frogs, then a bird eats 10 of those fish. Now the bird is eating the equivalent of 1,000 of those bugs, and the pesticide adds up. Last, human activity in general can be very bad for birds, whether it's building with large glass windows that birds don't recognize, or having cats as pets and letting them loose on unsuspecting birds, or spreading manure in farmers' fields that ends up in waterways and changes the habitat. One of the most majestic species at risk you will ever see is the bald eagle. Bald eagles have nested many years on a dead tree on an island in a marshy area in Boat Lake, beside the OEC's shoreline. We are very lucky to see them regularly, and hopefully they will continue to recover and become a more common sight. So, what led to eagles becoming a species at risk? First, DDT, dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane. DDT was a pesticide used by farmers and landowners for many years before it was discovered that it bioaccumulates. That is, the higher up the food chain you go, the more there is. DDT caused bald eagles to be sicker and weaker and less likely to survive to adulthood, and also made their eggshells thinner and weaker, leading to less healthy young eagles being born. Second, habitat loss. Eagles nest in tall trees, generally near abundant hunting grounds. The shoreline of Boat Lake at the OEC is a great place for eagles to catch fish, small mammals, ducks, and many other types of prey. The shoreline of Boat Lake is not a nice, landscaped, manicured waterfront. As development has turned wild waterfronts into lawns and docks, eagles have had a harder and harder time finding prey and nesting sites. Last, in the not too distant past, eagles were hunted as pests and for trophies. While eagles will prey on domestic animals, this is not in any way a key source for the diet. Also, along with turkey vultures, they will eat carrion, dead animals, and help get rid of them before they start to smell and become a source of disease. So, what are we doing to help? While we are putting in a new dock on Boat Lake, we are aiming to keep the rest of the waterfront as wild as possible. Next, we are staying pesticide free. Our fields are cut for hay, but we do not use any pesticides on them. This is easier for the OEC given that farming is not our primary purpose, but it is possible for farms and golf courses and others to do as well. Last, We teach about apex predators. You might have learned about them yourself when you came here and did the survival game. Eagles are in danger because they are at the top of the food chain, but they are also important because they are at the top of the food chain. By hunting the species lower down, they help to maintain sustainable population levels so we don't have other animals becoming pests or overusing resources. One of the rarest species at risk we see at the OEC is the bobolink. This small, unique songbird is at risk due to habitat loss. They nest in meadows, and many of those have been converted to fields. Bobolinks are happy to nest in hayfields, especially those that don't have pesticides, but their nests often fail when the hay is cut. Also, bobolinks suffer due to competition from invasive species, especially starlings. While starlings are cavity nesters and so not directly competing for nesting sites, they do compete with bobolinks for food, including seeds and insects. While we may go entire years without seeing a bobolink at the OEC, there are some actions we take to support them. First, we teach about them, so that if kids are walking or hiking and come upon a nest on the ground in a field, they know how important it is to leave it alone. Next, our fields are specially designated as bobolink habitat, so we cut our hay much later in the summer than many other farms. Last, when you drive by the site, you'll notice nesting boxes out in our fields. Again, bobolinks nest on the ground, so they won't be using these, but these boxes will support other birds that are challenged by starlings, including bluebirds and swallows. Here's Miss Diebel from the OEC on some of the ways we teach about species at risk at the OEC without harming them.
I would say that happens in one of two ways. Often it's just serendipity, and as much as we try to avoid getting too close to wildlife, we often stumble across it when we're out with students. So that gives us lots of opportunities to teach in the moment and be spontaneous and talk to the students about topics around species at risk, or habitat concerns for that species. And the other way is with targeted programming. So we do a lot of nature-based programming around trees, for example, or lake studies, or birds. And so we can build species at risk discussions into the lessons that we do, especially with the grades that we target. Grade 4 study habitats, grade 6 study biodiversity. So there's a lot of things that point to species at risk in that curriculum that we're able to use.
When we recognize that human actions are negatively affecting animals and the environment, we can make changes that make a difference. First, if we change our habits before the animal population is too low or too sporadic, meaning that none of them live close enough together to be a sustainable breeding population, then some animals are able to recover. Sandhill cranes were hunted almost to extirpation in Ontario and also suffered due to DDT. Since the 1990s, though, their numbers have steadily increased. Maybe you have seen them out in a farmer's field or heard their wild cry flying overhead. Even if we cannot catch a bird's decline before it's too late, conservationists have had success with reintroducing some species. Wild turkeys were hunted to extirpation in Ontario, but since being reintroduced in 1986, they have spread beyond their original range. Here's Miss Diebel from the Outdoor Ed Center on her experience with sandhill cranes.
I would say the most remarkable comeback is the sandhill crane. Before I started working here, I did work up on the Bruce Peninsula for a summer, and in that summer we saw two sandhill cranes the entire summer. And now, we see flocks of them flying over. We have a nesting pair that uses the property every summer, and we definitely do see them around more often.
And here's the OEC's Mr. Alamang on why it is important to protect birds.
Well, Mike, I think there's lots of reasons that we should take care of bird species at risk. And probably the number one, which is almost not obvious, is that they're pretty. Birds are pretty. And we should conserve and protect and encourage pretty natural things on our planet. Other ones are they provide ecosystem services, so they will take care of all kinds of pests that we don't like in crop fields. They'll take care of insect infestations. They actually sometimes provide prey or food for other creatures that depend on them. So that's super important. And another one, which is in some ways my favorite idea, which is not maybe universally palatable, is that they provide fertilizer. They poop, and plants like poop. In fact, lots of shrubs, lots of trees, lots of even flowers, probably, I'm not sure, would not exist without the bird eating the fruit or the seed, pooping it out, fertilizing, and starting that plant off with a beautiful birth package.
Now that we've learned about species at risk, what can you as a student do to help? What are the important actions that you can take to help species at risk? Here's Mr. Alamang from the OEC again with some answers.
There are a number of things students can, non-adults or even adults can learn more about the species at risk. Where do they spend the summer? Where do they spend the winter? How do they get from A to B, summer to winter, winter to summer areas? Um, Folks can learn about where your food comes from and are there styles of farming or farming practices that can encourage or even protect species at risk. And you could try to get food from those kinds of farms or tell your family where that food comes from, which producers of food are taking up some of those practices. Lastly, of course, you can encourage people who control land, whether it's your backyard, your front yard, your schoolyard, to plant more plants and more kinds of plants. And I like to tell people, even adults, if you could do one thing to help species at risk, probably the single best thing you could do would be to plant an oak tree. And this is not something I've dreamt up, it's something a bug scientist um, has written about in a book called The Nature of Oaks. He says, plant an oak tree. Oak trees support more species of bugs than any other tree. So if you plant one or two, you are going to make a lot of insects and a lot of creatures that eat insects like birds very happy.
If you'd like to find out more about what we are doing to help species at risk at the Bluewater Outdoor Education Centre, please visit our websites at bef-oec.org and at oec.bwdsp.on.ca, or feel free to email us at info@bef-oec.org. Thanks.